Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. 16 after 8 o'clock. Our first guest is standing by to talk with us, and she's Advocate Fairouz Nagia. She's a member of the PAGAD Working Committee, and it gives us great pleasure to be talking with her this morning. Assalamu alaikum, dear sister. Welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam, and shukran for amplifying this very important issue we'll be discussing today.
Absolutely. Hats off to the people of the Western Cape. When I saw coverage of that march on Saturday, that was kind of, goosebumps moments that I had. So alhamdulillah for that. And of course, there's so many issues that ties in with that march. It's not only about, the central issue obviously is Gaza and the genocide playing out in Gaza. But of course, a couple of issues were raised by this march. Let's start off by talking about the march. But before we get there, the important contribution and the stance that PAGAD has taken regarding the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, absolutely. Like so many other organizations, civil society, PAGAD feels very strongly about, that accountability must be met. We have to have accountability for what we see happening, and we have to have an entire cessation of the genocide, of violations of every, important text in international law. Hopefully we'll touch on what we want to do when it comes to our domestic framework, but certainly we are calling for accountability and cessation. We have to see an end to this Nakba. I think every single nation with a good conscience, every single organization and individual with a conscience has to actually come to the fore to say, we've seen enough. This has to stop. And growingly, we see that there's support for this, and PAGAD being on the forefront is quite clear in its stance that this is the case.
And long live PAGAD is all I can say. Alhamdulillah for that. I'm kind of wondering, before we get to the heart of the matter, we do know that in the Western Cape, lots of Jewish people, not only from around the country, but from abroad, have settled there. In the Western Cape, it has sent property prices through the roof, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm kind of wondering about the Jewish community there. We also can't make a blanket statement by suggesting all of them living in that part of the world are Zionists. How do you see that situation? And also, with this massive march, and it's not the first time that the Muslims have come out, Muslims and non-Muslims who say, not in my name and no to the genocide, who have come out in their hundreds to make their voices heard regarding the genocide. The response from the Jewish community in the Western Cape, or possibly even the Zionist community from the Western Cape, do the marchers feel threatened at all?
Mm-hmm. So, look, I never like to speak on behalf of any other group, but from what I can say from our coalitions, we definitely do have Jewish people who come out and say, not in my name. We do not support Zionism. What we see happening is atrocious, and they do not support Israel. They do not support the acts of Israel. And so too are members of the Christian faith. So large contingents from these faiths are part of the movements that you see having manifested on Saturday. So certainly it is, we also know that Zionism is an ideology. It's not about a religion, it's more about an ideology. And like apartheid, which was really substantiated by religious texts, we do have religious texts being used to bolster an ideology, and we shouldn't actually lose sight of that. So yes, that's great.
So let's talk about the march. As I've indicated, it was really about goosebump moments because of the massive crowds that came out to really support Palestine and to call for an end to the genocide. I think a lot of issues were raised during this march. Number one, the South African government was urged to implement a bill that will provide legal basis for boycotts and sanctions against Israel, because there is talk about South Africa supplying coal to genocide apartheid Israel. how was it met? Was there a memorandum that was handed over?
There was a memorandum that was handed over and included those demands. We also know that there's been an independent process where we were looking at that bill, and we know that it's supported by a range of parties, of political parties. We know that taking the lead on this is the Al Jamaa party, and we know that that needs to be gazetted at this point in time. So it's been through the process, and we're just waiting for that to happen. So what the bill does is it domesticates the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. So we know that internationally there are sanctions for the crime of apartheid, and this has been already in place since 1976. And we as a country, surprisingly, but rather late than never, we deposited our instrument in 2024. So following and keeping up on that momentum and seeing the escalation that we're seeing in Gaza, we know that the United Nations General Assembly basically supported the declaration that that Israel, for example, is an apartheid state. We also know that the importance of this instrument in general, the role that it plays for us as South Africans. So that was a bit surprising for the late accession to it and deposit of that instrument. And we want to actually see this being taken forward, because if any country should take the lead, it really should be South Africa. We know that there are organizations in other countries that have also looked at prosecutions domestically. This will allow us to prosecute crimes of apartheid generally. So it allow our high courts, for example, to have a jurisdiction in that matter, no matter where the acts are perpetrated. And we do know that they are currently before the National Prosecuting Authority. We do have cases pending where we have people who have joined the IDF, for example. So we would like to see that there's some momentum around that. But I do want to emphasize that it is something that has both domestic application for our own issues as well, but also internationally, generally, it has quite an import as well.
Among the demands as well was the passing of the apartheid bill to isolate Israel, and of course the shutting down of its embassy in Pretoria. I'm actually surprised that no one else has brought up this, or perhaps they have, but nothing has happened thus far. It is about time that embassy is shut down, is it not?
Mm-hmm. Calls for this have been put forward for many years already. We had called for the embassy to close. As we see the global sentiment changing, as we see international law changing, we are hoping that domestically we will kind of follow suit, because when it comes to issues like this, what we see happening in the international arena works very closely with what we see domestically, and we have this kind of peer pressure that happens in addition to our internal pressure. What we see happening now domestically is that we have more people coming on board. We know that organizations like, movements like the BDS, for example, have been calling for this for a very long time. We have the PSC, we've got PAGAD, a range of organizations, and we see the public, the general public, the masses, as you've mentioned, just the crowd that comes behind this. The sentiment is that it's about time, and very often we need that kind of groundswell. So I'm hoping we carry that momentum that we've seen from the march going forward for the signing of this particular bill. Like I said, it's a very important bill. We see we see these changes happening and being internalized. Civic organizations, heads of state, South Africa needs to come on board. It's about time. Like I said, the importance of us to lead a process like this is monumental, because we as South Africa, we've lived through that. We've lived through apartheid. We know we are still dealing with the ramifications of that. What is happening in Palestine is manifold worse in so many instances. It's, a genocide is
absolutely,
and what is supporting this genocide, and what has been, it's whatever structures and systems are in place to have created this situation for Palestinians is the apartheid nature of how it had been manifested from 1948 to now. We have seen how various acts of apartheid had come to isolate, to destroy, to dehumanize Palestinians. And this is the import of bills like this, and conventions like this generally. So to have it domesticated is extremely important, so we can actually see. When I spoke about accountability, this is the kind of accountability that we need to see. So we want the South African state to come on board and to actually put measures in place that are effective, that's tangible, that we can actually see something come out of that. It's no good just standing on a podium and to pay lip service to a particular cause and say, yes, we agree it's a genocide, we're taking you to the ICJ. We know the limitations to that. When it comes to something like this, we see some enforcement measure. We see true accountability taking place. And that's what we want to see happening. At this stage, people's emotions are running so high, and we know this, and we feel changes in the ether. Moves like this is what's going to concretize coming closer to seeing a free Palestine, coming closer to seeing the cessation of the genocide and the attacks against the Palestinian people. This is what people want. And we want governments to actually act on that. And as South Africa, we have a moral obligation to see this process through and to enact it as soon as possible.
Fairouz, I'm going to digress a minute. I'll come back to the bill in a minute or two. It's very important that we unpack it in more detail. But we've just heard that there's a possibility that part of the supposed peace process in Gaza or Palestine would mean, and once again, it was Trump Almighty that has made this proposal, that one of the ex-prime ministers of the UK, Tony Blair, would then oversee the governing of Gaza. I mean, that takes me back to the Balfour Accord. And why are the British still, and why are the Western powers still complicit in wanting to run the lives of the Palestinian people and to take control? They need to just hand over and let the Palestinian people do what is meant to be done. Or is this about, once again, that foreign governments need to come to probably stabilize the situation and perhaps let reconstruction begin and let people start picking up the pieces, if they can in fact do that, try and pick up the little bits of pieces that's left of their lives and start building and going forward. Your thoughts on that?
One question we have to ask ourselves is, how can you let an architect of a colonial project actually see a process through to its end, hoping that you're going to see a positive result that is not the continued colonization of Palestinians, that is not the continued oppression of Palestinians? That's the only outcome that we can see. It is a country being interventionist, trying to hold on to its colonial power. It's actually one of the key architects of the Israeli project. It wants to see that project going through. And people are not fleeced. People can see exactly what the motives are behind it. And there is no way the international world can allow an architect of apartheid, of genocide, of what we see happening in Palestine, being the one to oversee Palestinian people. I mean, that is just utter insanity. So we want to see if a rebuilding process is, the Palestinian people need to be on the forefront of that. They legitimately, democratically elected leaders need to be the ones to see this process forward. It cannot be a colonial power. It cannot be an imperialist power. And however much we say there's no more colonialism and there's no more imperialism because we're now in the new age, neocolonialism is very much still alive. We see it happening. We see the product of that happening in Palestine. So, I mean, that would be utter insanity. I do hope that the United Nations General Assembly can actually do its job and say, no, we need a process where Palestinians can lead the way forward, and the entire United Nations and all peace-loving, freedom-loving countries must be behind them to support them. We need to see reconstruction happening, and everything that is going to happen in terms of a free Palestine must be led by the Palestinian people. Without that, everything is just lip service. Without that, I think even for countries who are pro-Palestine need to understand who needs to be leading this. And it's certainly not the West. So just hopefully that will be dismissed as insanity. And when people actually come to vote on that, we will never see it coming to fruition. But certainly we need to see autonomy of the Palestinian people, and that is definitely not the way.
Let's come back home and talk about the bill that hopefully will provide legal basis for boycotts and sanctions against Israel. Is the bill as broad as that? Can it address a number of issues, or will it just hone in on the shutting down of the embassy in Pretoria, the Israeli embassy in Pretoria?
The bill is quite comprehensive. So it actually deals with any action that is a manifestation of apartheid. It criminalizes it. And obviously from that one can actually derive many other kind of international law fora. We can take that to the international fora outside of the criminal kind of sector. You know that there are the two types of laws, they can run parallel. But what this particular bill would do was that it actually creates criminal sanctions for acts of apartheid for organizations or entities, individuals who are seen to be complicit in the act of apartheid, who are seen to support it, who perpetrate it. So it's quite comprehensive in that regard. As the convention recognizes, any act of apartheid which subjugates one race to another, which creates this oppressive systemic framework which allows for such oppression, which creates clear divisions, whether it be in a social, economic, even geographic manifestation of that. It's included in the bill. It's a domestication of what we see in the international framework generally, and we know that we can only prosecute domestically if we do domesticate it. And this bill actually does that. So it's quite comprehensive. It touches on complicity, on actual perpetration. It talks about sanctions for that, and it's criminal sanctions. It creates, there cannot be immunity, which is being called for. So we cannot say, look, I'm a head of state and acted in my official capacity. The bill actually tries to counter that, to say that there will be no such exclusions. So it's quite progressive. It is quite comprehensive. So wherever we see, and like I said before, it has both international as well as domestic application. So it would be interesting to see how the state is going to take this forward, and we do hope that it's going to be soon. We do know that the majority of political parties are standing behind this. We have a few, and we know the usual suspects who'd be objecting towards that. But generally, I think that there is a large majority behind the passage of this bill. So we want to see, that this is going to be signed into law. We know what is happening in the GNU, but we cannot go against what the international community is saying, what the United Nations General Assembly is saying, what our politicians are saying on the platform, to say we do not support any act that is any manifestation of either genocide, either apartheid. We always have this, these parades of condemnation around it verbally. So there's no way that we can actually say, look, we have to stall this, because the time is right for it now. Politically, the time is right for us to have this. And like I said, from a 1976 instrument to domesticating it, or depositing your instrument only in 2024, it's now before you in 2025. It's long overdue. It's absolutely long overdue, and we want to see this happening, and happening fast, so that we can have, like I said, that accountability that South Africa will be spearheading. We know that other countries, and even without this, there are limitations to seeing that, and we want to eradicate any such limitation. You spoke about closure of the embassies. That's just one of it. We want to see accountability to the full extent of the word. Those who are involved in the crime of apartheid, we need to see them being held accountable for it. And we want to see a cessation of any act that falls under the definitions of apartheid.
Okay, I'm going to keep you just for another minute or two. So many questions regarding this matter. It started out regarding PAGAD's, creating and being involved in this march, but there's so much. This issue is so very complex, and lest we forget, and lest we kind of feel that there are way too many protests. Each and every protest has a very, very strong message that needs to go out, and the world needs to know, hear, and see what the issues are. But let's just, as an advocate, very quickly, a short summary on the case that was brought by South Africa to the ICC and the ICJ, on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also know that South Africa, or certain companies within South Africa, is supplying coal to apartheid Israel. Isn't that a conflict of interest? And should we, in fact, I mean, really? How can that be? How can that even have been allowed? That's kind of a mud in our faces, isn't it?
Absolutely. We have a very duplicitous international order. It is a conflict in policy. It is a conflict in public statements, and it is definitely a conflict in our constitution. Once we have this bill in place, and I do believe that that's part of the reticence because of our complicity and because of our international economic relations that we have with entities which we have no business having economic relations with. The excuse is that, because of our vulnerable position internationally in economic sense, that
Can
we
I,
have to
sorry,
have no.
Fairouz, I do have my second guest standing by, but I have to ask this very important question from a listener. Costa T is asking, if this bill or law happens to be passed, can Cyril Ramaphosa be arrested under this law?
Without mentioning any names, if you are found to be guilty of any of the acts listed in in the act, you can be prosecuted. So it will be a very rigorous process. The threshold is quite clear. And if you meet that threshold, then yes, whoever you are, no matter what head of state you are, you would. And I would just like to end off the previous question to say that despite any argument that the state can make that we need these economic relations, we do not. Because we are in an increasingly multipolar world, we have various other suppliers, we have various others in our SADC region alone, although that there are complications in that as well. There are options. There's no lack of options as the excuses that they put forward. So we do want to see our international law, our international relations, our economic relations coming into alignment with our policy statements, with our case before the ICJ, because this duplicity has to end. We as South Africans say, you as a government have to represent our voices, even though we have a minority of voices that support Zionism, and we have to be conscious of that. The majority of South Africans are saying we do not want ties with any kind of, industry that is linked to Israel because it is guilty of genocide. It is guilty of the crime of apartheid, and we do not want to have links. Just like South Africa was cut off, we want to see that happening because that's the only way we're going to actually see changes in the international arena. We cannot be complicit in that.
Advocate Fairouz Nagia, member of the PAGAD Working Committee, what a pleasure talking with you this morning. I so do wish we had more time because there's just so much to unpack. Hopefully we will talk again. Shukran very much for being with us on the show this morning. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
It is exactly 8:39. We're moving along, and I understand we're going to be talking to someone probably on the flotilla. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll get back to. Pardon, no, we're not going to talk to someone on the flotilla. We're going to talk to a Tehran-based journalist, and that is Ali Reza Kamandi.